Welcome to Asia-Pacific Defence Reporter, your go-to source for cutting-edge security insights in the region. Get ready for rapid-fire analysis and commentary from the Asia-Pacific with your host, Kim Bergman.
Hello and welcome back. I'll start with a large apology, and that was in the previous podcast. I concluded by saying that I was going to be covering the big Indo-Pacific Defence exhibition in Sydney, the one with a maritime focus. Unfortunately, I didn't make it there because the previous Friday night I managed to have a very embarrassing slip on some stairs and hurt my lower back and rendered myself pretty much immobile for close to a week. Optimistically, I was hoping to make it up, but no, that didn't turn out to be the case. So I am sorry for my own stupidity. Anyway, luckily, there were several journalists who were there, and they've managed to send material through to me, such as recordings of briefings, and as indeed have some companies. So I don't feel that I've been completely isolated, and of course I've been watching coverage in the media. But I'll start with a couple of small corrections from the previous episode. As you know, I like to make sure that everything is as accurate as possible. And in referring to collaborative combat aircraft, I accidentally called them on one or two occasions close combat aircraft. No, it's collaborative combat aircraft that is the correct terminology. But it was an interesting slip of the tongue because when you think about it, close combat are the sorts of things that you might wish to use collaborative combat aircraft for. That's just a reminder. These are the autonomous, uncrewed, unmanned aircraft that accompany crewed aircraft into combat and do all sorts of missions where you would not necessarily want to risk human lives. Now, also in the same vein, I called the Ghost Bat being developed by Boeing Australia, the MQ-29, and people must have been screaming at their devices, yelling MQ-28. MQ-28 is correct, and for that error I can only blame the fog of Nurofen. Now, so some of the things at Indo-Pacific, I noticed that politically there's been a lot more self-congratulation about AUKUS Pillar 1, nuclear-powered submarines, and as I have lamented on so many, many occasions, can journalists, or more particularly news presenters, stop simply repeating what they have been told at face value? I saw yet another, what I thought frankly was an embarrassing interview on the ABC with Vice Admiral Jonathan Meade, the head of the Australian Submarine Agency, and Defence Minister Richard Marles, who, by the way, is increasingly reluctant to use the term Defence Minister. That seems to be being cut out. It's now the Deputy Prime Minister or nothing. Anyway, there he was, in his capacity, I believe, as Defence Minister. And the journalists simply asked them to repeat the normal talking points about how wonderful everything is. No scrutiny, no serious questioning at all. So, listeners, please understand, as many of you I'm sure do by now, no matter what the government says and no matter what the Navy says, the sale to Australia of Virginia-class submarines is not guaranteed because it requires the US to be building a lot more of them, and at the moment they can't even meet their own needs. Now, can anyone, please ask a minister about that? Now, in that context, I do note the head, as I mentioned, of the Australian Submarine Agency, Vice Admiral Meade, is retiring next year. I wish him well, though I've never met him. And like many senior people, he has skillfully avoided being questioned by the likes of me. I also note, somewhat ungraciously, that as a consequence of public service staff surveys, the Australian Submarine Agency was voted the worst place to work in the entire bureaucracy. And in the outpouring of praise for the Vice Admiral, I hope that fact is noted before he is knighted or declared a saint. Now, as for this continuing lack of scrutiny, about AUKUS, AUKUS Pillar 1 in particular, I note that the government and the coalition got together and have blocked a Senate inquiry into AUKUS. Now, this has not received anything like the coverage it deserves, and we are living in a bizarre, topsy-turvy world where it is the Australian Greens trying to ensure that we get value for money for our defence spending. Now, I've had a look at the terms of reference of the proposed inquiry, and I cannot understand how either the government or the coalition could possibly object to any of it. So, terms of reference. A. The inquiry seeks the advice and analysis provided to the government before and following the AUKUS agreement. B. The implications of AUKUS and the acquisition of nuclear submarines for militarization and stability in the region. C. The implications of the AUKUS agreement for Australia's foreign policy and defence policy, including the projected role of AUKUS submarines in defending Australia. D. The capacity of the US and UK nuclear submarine industries to provide Australia with either existing Virginia-class submarines or future SSN-AUKUS submarines. E. The impact on the balance of Australia's defence capacity given the scale of resources required for AUKUS nuclear submarine acquisition and procurement. F. The impact of the AUKUS agreement on Australia's international obligations and adherence to international law. G. The impact on Australia's defence in the event that the UK and or the US cannot provide the submarines envisaged by the AUKUS project and considerations given to alternative plans. H. The management and storage of nuclear waste and its impact on First Nations land and communities, and I. Any other related matters. Now, I think that is an entirely reasonable list of questions. I can't see anything wrong with it. It's very much the sort of thing that I have been trying to get answers to for about 3 years now, and I wonder what it is that the government, in collusion with the coalition, are so keen to cover up. What could possibly be the harm of such an inquiry with those terms of reference, unless it revealed for all to see just how shaky all of this is? Now, that gives me an excuse to say a few more words about the South Korea-US agreement to build nuclear-powered submarines. As I reported last time, and you can also read my story in the current edition of Asia-Pacific Defence Reporter, there's a very long way to go in all of this. And I note, even though it's very early days, there are plenty of people in the Republic of Korea asking, rightly I believe, why build even one submarine in the US? You might recall the initial words of Donald Trump was that the first submarine would be built in Philadelphia at the Hanwha Ocean Yard, which they've recently purchased, called the Philly Yard. But a lot of people in South Korea are saying, well, why not do them domestically? That's a very good question. I believe that South Korea does have the resources to be able to undertake the entire project on their own territory, and I assume that the words about building in the United States are either a matter of international relations and the decision of President Lee to make Donald Trump as happy as possible, a tendency shared by far too many of the world's politicians, I believe, or it could be that perhaps Donald Trump himself misunderstood or misheard. And I think it's the latter, by the way, because just a couple of days ago, South Korea's Defense Minister Ahn has already contradicted Trump at a hearing in the National Assembly, their parliament, this sort of forum where things like nuclear-powered submarines are discussed and where ministers have to answer questions. Anyway, Defence Minister Ahn said as part of his testimony, this is a direct quote, "We have only discussed the overarching principle so far, and there has been no mention of where to build them, whether in Korea or the US. So if you have the South Korean defense minister in Parliament on the record saying no decision has yet been taken on where they're going to be built, I think we can assume that all of this stuff about the yard in Philadelphia was Donald Trump's invention. I said before, knowing a little bit about the capabilities of South Korean industry, they could do it domestically. I think really the only issue is getting access to uranium enriched to the correct amount as a result of a 2015 treaty between the Republic of Korea and the US. The Republic of Korea is not allowed to enrich uranium, but if they were to go down the path of a low enriched uranium reactor, I wonder if that changes the equation. Anyway, this is a work in progress, and again, I can only urge Australian politicians and Navy figures to take an interest in what Korea is doing. It'll be very embarrassing if, as I expect, Korea has a nuclear-powered submarine in the water well before the British-built AUKUS sub, and I'm going to come to that in a moment, is ever launched. But, of course, we won't be talking to the Koreans because, as I've said on many occasions, AUKUS isn't really so much about nuclear-powered submarines. It's a return to the Anglosphere, and regrettably, South Korea ain't part of it. So unless Australian admirals can go to Washington and London, I don't think that they're going to take any interest in, nor, for that matter, are Australian politicians, because I think for too many of them, nuclear-powered submarines are also just some sort of vanity project. It's this idea that little Australia, again, punching above our weight, will be operating submarines that only the big boys have, that there we will be with the US and the Royal Navy and us and no one else, well, apart from, the French and the Russians and the Chinese and the Indians. And now, soon, of course, the South Koreans. And as I also said, there have been early noises in Japan that if South Korea goes down the nuclear propulsion path, Japan is likely to follow suit. So what previously looked like this really cozy three-way exclusive relationship will soon be not so exclusive after all. Okay, swinging back to Indo-Pacific, there are a couple of submarine-related announcements. PMB, Pacific Marine Batteries, have picked up a $34 million export order of batteries from Adelaide to the UK for their nuclear submarines. Good order. PMB, nice company. They started life as the subsidiary of the Swedish battery manufacturer Varta for the Collins program, but they've steered their own course. I welcome any export success at all. People might be wondering, well, the UK has nuclear-powered submarines. Why do they need batteries? Well, they need batteries because even nuclear-powered submarines are not foolproof, and they need emergency battery backup systems in case something goes wrong with the reactor. You want to have enough power there so that your systems still work, that you can get the submarine to the surface and all of that sort of good stuff. So congratulations to PMB. There was another large announcement, and this is something that's going to form the basis of a future story because at first glimpse it appears to be of enormous significance, and that is for the combat management system for the UK-built AUKUS submarine. And I'm going to read directly from the media release, and we'll take it from there. It has the title, Industry Leaders Unite to Deliver Combat System Capability for SSN-AUKUS. 4 major defence companies have proposed the establishment of an AUKUS combat systems collaborative team in contemplation of a potential role for Australia's SSN-AUKUS conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines under a Memorandum of Understanding signed today. BAE Systems, Raytheon Australia, General Dynamics Mission Systems and Thales propose to lead the design and lay the foundations for manufacture and integration of combat systems for SSN-AUKUS under agreements to be negotiated with the Commonwealth of Australia and the United Kingdom government. Now, I'm going to stop just right there, because this has already been written up in sections of the media as this profound step forward, as this major breakthrough. But I come back to the wording of it. It's to propose the establishment of a team in contemplation of a potential role. So to me, it doesn't sound like there's actually been a decision here on the part of the customer or customers. It's the Royal Navy and the Royal Australian Navy. Sounds like it's just an early positioning move. A welcome one at that. But the part of it that apart from, the general status and how solid this is the involvement of General Dynamics Mission Systems, because they are billed as providing or supplying to the United States Navy the AN/BYG-1 combat management system that is on the Virginia-class submarines, and in fact is what we have on the Collins submarines, and will be going into the future Columbia-class ballistic missile-firing submarines. Now, the thing is, Lockheed Martin is also the producer of the AN/BYG-1 combat management system, and I think in Australia most people would associate Lockheed Martin rather than General Dynamics as the producer of it. Now, they can't both be right, or in a way they possibly can be, and this is what I need to investigate to really understand what's going on. That is, in the United States, there are frequently two sources of supply for a weapon or a system. Patriot PAC-3, Lockheed Martin builds it, Raytheon also builds part of it. They both claim that they're the prime contractor. I think it's something similar with AN/BYG-1, but put an asterisk next to this one. I'm going to report back on this in some detail so we can figure out what on earth is actually going on. My own suspicion is that Lockheed Martin are keeping their powder dry. I suspect that Lockheed Martin want to bid in their own right as the sole combat management system provider for the AUKUS submarine. And when I say in their own right, I mean it would be a team pulled together by Lockheed Martin. They're going to need various... There are a lot of elements to the combat system, not least of which are the various sensors, your optronic masts, subsystems within it, such as the tactical data handling system. It's a big, complex thing. Anyway, this is yet another area where there already seems to be a huge amount of misreporting about what did or didn't happen. I shall investigate this further. And I'm just going to finish up completely off topic or on a different topic, but one to think about our relationship with the United States, the US military and extrajudicial killings. And I raise this as a question. I don't know how closely people have been watching this, but Defense Secretary or Secretary for War Pete Hegseth has been ordering the US Navy to blow up speedboats suspected of carrying drugs in the direction of the United States. I'm not sure how many boats have been blown up so far. I think about 60 people have been killed. As I say, these are extrajudicial killings. I wonder how people in the ADF think about that. Just a question out there. Is this consistent with Australian values? Is this the way that we behave? Or would we prefer to arrest people and put them on trial, not murder them on the high seas? That's all I've got time for this time. Again, I am sorry about missing Indo-Pacific. I'll do my best to make it up to everyone. Goodbye for now. Thank you very much for listening, and see you next time.
That's today's Asia-Pacific Defence Reporter. For more in-depth articles, expert opinions and exclusive interviews, visit asiapacificdefencereporter.com. Stay informed, stay ahead. This is your source for all things defence. Until next time.